The session today is about the data protection law that is coming in, already passed by the way, but still. I think the takeaways are always how is it different, because a lot of companies are multinationals and they already implemented GDPR, and there's a lot of guidance around GDPR, the US CCPA, the Saudi law, right? We have so much guidance around it, right? But now the information that we need is, first of all, if we don't know about those laws, how do we do it? How do we implement it? What are those 5, 10 tricks that are there around? But if we know it, how do we kind of modify what we have and just comply with it, right? So I kind of see this session in two parts for people who are in this session, right? One part of people is they know something. Yes, now I just want to understand what are these things that I do, right? We will cover this in the session. Now, then, next set of people is people who don't know anything about this. You are new in this session, and you just want to understand what do you do to comply, right? Again, compliance in privacy is never 100%, right? I am a consultant. I've been here for a very long time. It cannot be 100%, right? So, how do we come closer to compliance, right? What do we do that makes us very close to customers' confidence or customers' trust? So today's session is in partnership between Paramount and Tsaaro. The session will go around compliance and regulatory requirements under the UAE's data protection law. We have three speakers on the session today. I am the moderator. My name is Akash Singh. I am CEO and co-founder of Tsaaro. We are a data privacy consulting boutique firm. I am CIPM, CIPP, CIPT, one of the youngest FIPs in the world, IPP advisory board member, right? A few of the things. I've been into privacy for like 5, 6 years now. Before this, I used to work for KPMG. Then we kind of started off, and that's who we are. Over to you, Smruti and Suhas.
Right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you all the professionals who have joined us for this webinar. I'm Smriti Pradhan. I work as a senior data privacy consultant for Paramount Computers. And like Akash, I'm a privacy professional who is certified in IPPC-IPM. And in terms of data privacy and my industry experience, I have worked over 6+ years of industry experience in data privacy, where I have closely looked at projects considering the global privacy regulations such as GDPR. And also, I've worked closely with the clients in the Middle East region, understanding their privacy requirements and implementing them for them. So this is something which we have done and I have done as part of my experience. And over to Suhas for his introduction.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Akash and Smriti. It's an honor being part of this session. So my name is Suhas Krishnamurthy. I'm working as Senior Data Privacy Consultant with Paramount Computer Systems. And I have about 6 years experience in data privacy field, and I have worked on multi-regulatory environments such as complying to GDPR, CCPA, LGPD, and right now I'm completely focused on the Middle East regulations such as the Qatar's PDPL and Qatar FIFA framework. Along with this, we have developed some kind of expertise in the UAE's latest data protection law as well. And that's it from my end. I'm a CIPPE certified, and I'm looking forward to this session. Thank you so much.
All right. So welcome Suhas and Smruti, by the way, right? Great introductions. I think one thing that kind of came out, and I was just kind of assessing, all three of our careers around this is we all started privacy careers when GDPR kind of came in, right? In 2016, 17, right? And I think that is true for everyone, right? That is the max privacy experience I see around. Even if somebody is a security professional, right? They kind of align themselves around that. So guys, okay. So without wasting time, is a boutique privacy consulting firm, right? We do data protection as a service, data protection officer as a service, some things around privacy compliance. We highly work around Netherlands and India right now. Our work is focused on, let's say, completing a PIA, ROPA, things around privacy, right? That's what we do, right? That's where our expertise lies. Right. Over to Smruti for Paramount.
Yeah, so essentially, Paramount is a very known cybersecurity firm based out of UAE. And our services are not just limited to data security, risk and compliance consulting, but we also provide data privacy as one of our key services. Now, we have a dedicated team within Paramount who focuses on the data privacy requirements of our customers. Now, we have seen organizations who are very new to privacy field as well, who want to understand what the requirements are, what the laws are talking about. And that is where we support them in something as basic as conducting a gap assessment. so that they can gauge where they lie in terms of compliance, right, against the regulatory laws. But also we understand there are organizations who fairly understand the law, but in terms of implementation and in terms of operationalizing their privacy requirements. Now we have a very focused data privacy service portfolio for our customers, where we not just focus on end-to-end consulting services, but we also implement and operationalize the entire program by conducting privacy impact assessments for our customers, managing the data subject rights, having a full-fledged program for managing consents, and few other requirements which are expected from the global privacy laws, right? So in terms of service portfolio, we are not only helping organizations to achieve their privacy objectives, but also we are trying to accommodate their budget and resource constraints as well. So that is it from my team, and we really hope for an insightful session and a healthy discussion with all the professionals who have joined us from the region.
Right, Smriti. That kind of summarizes, right, around privacy that we do. Moving on to our discussion today. See, again, before starting the session, we definitely have disclaimers around saying this is an educational session. Our opinions that are expressed, whatever we are doing, right, is it's all indicational and with our current knowledge, right? This is not legal advice. Okay. Plus, I just want to kind of add a disclaimer every time I am doing a session, every time we are talking to people is this session is for you, right? We're conducting this session so that we can answer your question. So whatever your question is, right, just drop them in the chat box. I will take it up and we three will try to answer it, right? So again, this is a Q&A session, question and answers. We'll definitely kind of try to come around with answers, post this on YouTube in future as well. But still, whatever you think you have a doubt around, a question around, please drop it in the chat box or in the Q&A session. I will take that question up, keep posting it around. Okay. So agenda for the session is we'll talk about the landscape that we have currently, not just around the upcoming privacy law, the data protection law, but also around the laws that are already there. Then we'll talk about the key provisions that we have. The most important thing in a law is a data subject right, right? What are the rights that we have to give to the customer, right? And what are the principles that a company has to follow? Because there are two things that kind of any privacy program, right? The principles that a company follows and the rights that a company has to give, and everything other than that kind of adds on to that, right? So we'll talk about that. Cross-border data transfer, again, a hot topic around right now, especially if anybody who knows Europe GDPR, right? The data coming out becomes very difficult. Similarly, in UAE law that we see, cross-border transfer takes a good position to understanding. Then we'll talk about differences, right? GDPR and UAE federal law. So you have in the chat, by the way, for Menti. So now, okay. So when did the federal law take effect in UAE? So whatever you think is what you have to answer. If you don't know, it's fine, right? Was it 2nd of January, 8th of January, or 10th of January? So Smriti, what is the right answer, by the way?
January.
Suhas, do you have a different opinion, by the way?
Oh, it's 2nd of January.
2nd of January. Okay. So everybody knows it's 2nd of January. And obviously we can see that, 32 people have already answered. Let's do a quick base development around the law, right? Around an understanding of what this law is all about. Why are we talking about it? How is it different? What is the difference it is going to make over time, right? So Smriti, would you like to take this up?
Yeah, sure. So we have to understand one thing, Akash, when it comes to privacy, right? UAE is not something very new to it. We have had sectoral laws earlier, where we find bits and pieces of data privacy, protecting the personal information of the customers. Now, the only thing which was missing in the previous laws was that there was no comprehensive federal law. And that is where a lot of countries basically, we started with European laws like GDPR, and suddenly, Middle East is also coming, pacing up with all these laws. That is where UAE decided to, issue a federal data protection law during September last year. And that law came into effect from January this year. So in terms of privacy, this is going to be the first comprehensive data privacy law in UAE. Now, when it comes to the effect and the impact, the scope is going to increase massively, because when we talk about sectoral laws, right, they are generally related to sectors like be it banking, be it from somebody from the health sector, right? But this law is going to be applicable to all the organizations who are processing the personal information of the UAE residents or citizens, right? The scope has massively increased. And this is where we see that the federal law, which is being implemented or going to be implemented in UAE once the ERs are out, which is the executive regulations are out, it's going to impact organizations, and organizations need to take steps to actually build that privacy program in terms of, protecting the personal
Right, Smriti.
data subjects. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of sums up an introduction around the law. But
Right.
let's kind of come to the technical part, right? But before the technical part, like guys, if you want Menti, right? Do you think this is the first data protection regulation around UAE? That is the question that we want to check with you. Do you think this is the first regulation that is there around data protection, not around privacy, not around, just around protection of personal data we're talking about? Okay. Okay, Smriti has already kind of defined that this is not new. Smriti, you've already given the answer, I think. Okay. So guys, menti.com, right? It's let's just hit no or yes, whatever you think, and then okay. So I think we already know the answer is no, and everybody has kind of answered the same. So I think we all are in the same page. So let's talk about the regulatory landscape now, since we know that this is not new. This is not something that just came up. So Suhas, would you like to kind of take us through probably a timeline and the indicative important laws that are already around?
Absolutely. So basically, when you see UAE's landscape, right? So there are multiple sectoral laws. So for example, there is, the federal law number 2 of 2016 on combating cybercrimes. Or for that matter, you have the UAE's Central Bank Consumer Rights Law, which is also called as CPR requirements, right? So which focuses primarily on the consumer protection rights. Also, there are a couple of other laws related to the health data protection and, internet access management, regulatory policy and all. But one thing, as Smriti said, which is missing primarily is these are sectoral laws, right? So all the companies do not fall under the gamut of these laws. So taking advantage of such gaps, right? So organizations might, feel that there is no requirement to comply to this law. So basically, what UAE's data protection law does is that it bridges that gap and makes each and every organization accountable to whatever data is being handled by them. So that is where we see that, even though organizations might already be complying to the CPR law or probably, the combating cybercrimes law, but still organizations might have to still comply to the UAE data protection law.
Right, Suhas. So Suhas, I think, being around the law, I think one thing I just want to point out to everyone as well, there are a few exemptions to the law, like the banking data. The another exception that we have is DIFC. They are not good. They are not going to get governed. So the data protection office that is going to be built, the data office that is going to be built, will kind of keep them as exceptions. Okay. So guys, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. And the questions, if they're very relevant, I'll take them right now. Otherwise, we have a Q&A session after this. We'll kind of talk about all the questions that we're missing out. We'll just kind of take them up. So there's no stress around that. Again, menti.com. Do you think all the organizations have to comply with this law? Yes or no? But this is an important question. This is a question of understanding. And this is, even if there is somebody on this chat in the group listening to us as a privacy professional, as a compliance professional, this is important to understand, because if we kind of look at the laws that are there in the world right now, GDPR applies to everyone mostly, because if you have an employee in the company, you have PII, right? But if you look at US, the laws are more commercialized, right? Even if you have an employee, but if you're selling the data or you're using data or your revenue is big enough, then the law applies to you. And the upcoming Indian law around, if you look around, what it says is it will again apply to everyone. So now, do you think this law of UAE that is coming up will apply to all the organizations, or is there, are there, limits around that? Okay, not sure. Okay. So yes, and there are exceptions. Okay. Okay, so we'll answer this, in depth. This is an important question for understanding. So let's talk about applicability of the law, right? And we have divided this into two parts, right? What all things will be in scope and what are the things that will not be in scope of the law. So Smriti, would you like to kind of help us understand?
Sure, Akash. So when we talk about the applicability of this law, so let me address that question, which we just asked in the previous slide. Is this law applicable to all the organizations? Well, somebody rightly pointed it out. There are exemptions. There will be exemptions, and not all organizations will be, falling under the gamut of it. Similar to GDPR, there have been, of course, there are exceptions when it comes to, like Suhas mentioned, when it comes to organizations who are following, free zone policies, data privacy policy, or there are sectoral laws. But another area where an exception has been provided is, there will be organizations who can actually ask for exemption from the data office, and it will be office's responsibility to actually determine whether that organization will fall under the gamut of it. Now, the variables which are going to decide that is what is the kind of processing you do, for how many data subjects you are doing that processing, if it is involving sensitive personal data or not. So depending upon the size and the processing activities, that exception can be provided. Now, coming to the applicability of this particular law, now let's say in scope, when I talk about in scope, right? So it will be applicable to all the organizations, first of all, who are based out of UAE, and whether they are processing data, personal data, information of the residents or citizens who are within UAE or not. That doesn't matter. If an organization is established out of UAE, it will fall under the gamut of this particular federal law. The other thing is, if today there is a data subject who is based out of UAE and he's utilizing a service of a company which is not based out of UAE, probably based out of Indonesia, India, or any other country, even that organization will fall under the gamut of this law. And this is where we see that this law has an extraterritorial reach. So similarly, at a data subject level, somebody who is, a resident of UAE, this law will be applicable to protect the data of those data subjects. Now, coming to the out of scope part. Now, this is where it gets interesting because when we look at sectoral laws, right, like let's consider there is a CPR regulation which is already in place within, UAE and has been mandated by the central bank. But when you look at that law, the data subject does not include employees. It includes the consumers. And consumers by the CPR law typically means people who are, taking the services or products from the bank. So this is where we see that law is fairly unclear right now about whether, the organizations might need to adopt for a dual compliance regime, where they both have to comply to UAE PDPL and also the central law, which is applicable to them in terms of banking sector. The other area where we see that the exemption has been provided is around the free zone, companies which are set up in free zones, right, and having their operations there, which is organizations who are already providing, and complying to DIFC and ADGM. They are completely exempted out of it. The other area where all of us, and especially the privacy professionals are focusing, and we are waiting for some more clarification, is on the exemption on the government data and the government authorities who have been exempted. So who is defined as an authority? What would be treated as government data? Those definitions are fairly unclear in the law right now. And that is where we are waiting for the executive regulations to provide more details on the same. And accordingly, those things can be exempted, Akash.
Right, Smriti. Thanks for your answer. But I think we are getting very interesting questions around Q&A section. So again, Suhas, this question is for you. For an MNC, and I think we started talking about this already. So for an MNC who already has a GDPR policy right in place, do you think UAE's upcoming law will impact?
Absolutely. So basically, even though we might at the face of it see that, the UAE's data protection law is a replica of GDPR, but there are a few intricate details which actually make it challenging to comply to the law, right? So for example, one of the main differences is that from the lawful basis, legitimate interest has been removed. So right now, when it comes to the actual privacy implementation across an organization, so the whole ROPA process or the whole privacy notice process, the privacy policy, everything has to be revamped to ensure that, the legitimate interest component is removed from them, and it is actually put into some other lawful basis or legal basis, which will allow it to comply to the UAE's data protection law. So this is just one example which I'm giving, but of course there'll be more challenges when it comes to actual implementation of the law.
Definitely, Suhas. I think I've been reading about this and, again, discussing with so many clients. Same thing, I think, coming around is also one of the things that I kind of pointed out. The sample privacy notices, right? How will it change the internal privacy policies? How is going to affect the data that is coming out from Europe to UAE, right? Again, the businesses that are UAE doing business in Europe. So again, I think privacy, as we all know, Smriti and Suhas, right, it becomes a bit complex. at beginning, but once we kind of have that organization strategy, once we have that organization defined internal policy, everything else just becomes a procedure. And but yeah, one very important question to Smriti, right? How is it going to impact organizations with their data on cloud? Because CSPs are spread across, right? So Smriti, do you would like to share some insights here?
Right. So when it comes to data localization requirements, right, Akash, UAE law is not very strict. They have provided a lot of exemptions, like data could be transferred to other countries provided the country follows adequacy decision. Now, adequacy decision is one of the transfer mechanisms where basically, if you're transferring data or you're storing it on cloud, which is in a country which already has a data protection law, then that is something which is acceptable. Other than that, there have been, alternative routes which have been provided that you can transfer data to other countries provided you take consents from the data subjects. This is another area where, it basically data can be stored on cloud. There is no hard and fast rule of, putting the data within UAE itself. But yes, it has to be according to the clauses that have been present in the law, which is again, aligning with the adequacy decision, having a bilateral agreement with the company which is there and with your third party service vendor providers.
Right. I think you pointed out one thing very important, right? And I know a lot of lawyers are on this call. So I think one thing that is very important is contracts, right? In privacy, one thing that is very important where we start is contracts, right? To share liability, to increase constraints and audit, right? A regular audit on the vendors, right? Because today we can change ourselves, but how does a vendor confidence, right, around the world that they are okay, they're able to use UAE citizens, UAE residents data? How do we give that confidence? Contract, right? So guys, contract is something that you should think about, straighten it up, right? That is something first thing that we should look up when you're thinking about the law. Okay, very important question asked by Marcus, right? And this is, I think I would like to take this up because I have been again working with them. So how can we read this in conjunction, right? Especially for a bank like Central Bank of UAE, right? See, a Central Bank of UAE is governed by the banking laws, right? And again, consent management and everything is already kind of coming around the banking laws and data management. So the law specifically states out that CPR and CPS of CBOA they are exempted right now, right? And once the data office sets up, we will know more around implementation of data, right? So okay. So coming to the next one, let's talk about things. So it's another 15 minutes. We'll open for Q&A only, right? We'll kind of talk about whatever questions you have. So if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat box or Q&A, or you can keep them with you, and we can have that discussion in the last 15 minutes. So what are the key provisions under the UAE data protection law? So Suhas, would you like to kind of give us more light around this?
Sure, Akash. Yeah. So one of the key provisions is, basically having a data protection office and appointing a data protection officer, right? Yep. So who is basically going to manage the whole data privacy program for the organization. And there are a couple of, provisions which are given regarding appointment of a data protection officer also, which has to be followed for an organization to, employ the DPO. The second one is basically, allowing the cross-border data transfer and data sharing. So this is where Smriti rightly pointed out in the earlier conversation that, data sharing is allowed, provided, certain restrictions are followed. For example, if the country actually falls under the adequacy decision of the data office, or for that, or for the matter of fact, there is a bilateral or a multilateral agreement with the country, or the processing can happen based on consents, or it can be for probably a legal or judicial purpose. So there are various provisions which are provided in the law for cross-border data transfer. The third one is basically having security controls in place for processing of personal data as well as sensitive personal data. So this law not exactly mandates, but actually tells the organizations that it is better to have encryption and anonymization techniques in order to protect the data which is which is being transferred within the organizations or outside the organization. The fourth and the main point is, the whole point of having the law is to have, to empower the data subjects with the rights, right? So similar to GDPR, there are 6 key rights which are provided to the data subjects, which includes, right to access information, right to erasure and rectification, and right to portability. and right to correction, and right to be informed and all. So there are six key data subject rights which are being provisioned in the law. And apart from that, the law also specifies that a data office will be set up, which will basically be the governing body or the authority which will take care of the whole data privacy implementation for the organizations, right? And this will be the authority which will basically determine the severity of a breach or impact of a breach, and accordingly start putting in fines on the organization. So these are the key highlights which I see as part of the UAE's data protection law.
Yep, I think that kind of summarizes a bit around, but I can see a lot of questions in the chat. Probably some of the questions I would definitely take up right now. And I just want to thank a few people in the chat for answering some questions already. I know a lot of data protection officers are around and they've answered a few questions. So thank you for that. Right. Thank you for answering that. So, okay, I think the question was, the one question that I kind of picked from the chat is, who is a data subject? I think we are right at this slide also, right at time. So Smriti, over to you, right? Who is a data subject, Smriti? And can you also talk about what are the rights? And also, Smriti, can you, while ending, I think, can you also add enough in saying what is the difference between a GDPR right and a Dubai or a UAE right, as you would like to call it? Yeah.
Sure. So first of all, data subject is any individual who is associated with the organization and his or her personal data is processed by the organization. Now, a data subject may include employees of the organization. It may include customers of the organization. It may include contractors or vendors who are working for the organization, and organization is collecting personal data on behalf of them. So this is where we see that all these privacy laws, they have done a very excellent job. They have provided some rights to these data subjects. So today, if I'm a data subject of an organization, even if I'm an employee or customer, I do have a right to go to the organization and acknowledge and fulfill and basically exercise any of the rights which have been given by the law. Now, when we look at the UAE personal data protection law, there are around 6 rights which have been given and which was discussed by Suhas in the last slide, which is including right to access your information, right to rectification of your information, right to delete your information, right to data portability. And we see that most of these rights are very much in alignment what GDPR provides. Now, one interesting thing is that other than this right, there is another right which has been provided to data subject, which is right to complain. Now, right to complain is something where the data subject can actually go to the data office that would be the governing agency of this particular law, and they can complain if an organization is mismanaging their personal data. And that is where it is also very important for the controllers to understand that how do they address these sort of complaints and how do they make sure that this right is acknowledged for the data subject.
I hope we have answered the question as well around, but there's a question here. So this is a very good question, by the way. So Suhas, the question is, if an EU citizen, this is a question to the Indian context. So I'll kind of miss this. But yeah, I think let's kind of put it in a UAE context, right? Would make a lot of sense. So let's say somebody in EU wants to fly to Dubai, right? Now he is in UAE, he books a hotel. Will UAE data protection law apply? Will he have rights according to UAE data protection law or will EU GDPR? What do you think?
So the law basically states that any resident who is in the UAE will be able to exercise his or her right. So, but of course, there will be further clarification which will be provided in the executive regulation. But at present, it seems that anyone who is domiciled in UAE or is a resident of UAE, right, that person should be able to exercise this right.
Yeah. So Amol, I think your question has also been answered just now. Okay. Sahil has a great question. What he asks is, data subject rights are provided by only controllers or will they also be provided by processors, right? So Smriti, what do you think?
The data subject rights are something which has to be provided by the controller. At least in UAE data protection law, we have not seen this requirement specifically being mentioned for the processors. But according to the law, right, there are some other requirements which are very much in alignment, like processors have to maintain a record of processing activity as well. They also have to hire a DPO. Which we see that in some regulations this is missing. So for the DSR, it's the controllers who are going to provide the rights as of now, but we can expect some further clarification in the executive regulations that will come up.
I'd like to add just one point to what Smriti said. So basically, even though the obligation is on the controller to provide the data subject rights, so processors also have certain obligations with respect to DSRs, right? So they need to assist the controllers in fulfillment of the right. So that is where it all boils down back to the data processing agreement, which basically states that the processor also has some role in the fulfillment of data subject rights, and they have to so for example, if there is a right to erasure which is being exercised by Smriti, right? In that case, I am the controller and you are the processor, Akash. In that case, I will receive the request. I have to instruct you to delete all the data about Smriti Pradhan and send a confirmation back to the controller, which is me. So this is the kind of indirect obligation which the UAE data protection law has put on the processors.
Correct.
So Sajid has a great question. All right. I think Sajid has asked about penalties around data breaches, right? And this is something that is not very clear yet, right? We are still waiting for the data office. But I think there's one more question that he has added is what is the breach notification timeline? Right. So Suhas and Smriti, would you like to take this up? What is that timeline of breach?
Right. So the breach notification timeline in the current draft law, which has been released, that has not been mentioned. So what they've mentioned is, they need to inform immediately or as soon as possible. So there is clarity on that. And also they mentioned in the law that the timeline details, right, that will come in the ERs, the executive regulation.
Okay. So I'll take the next question. Shall the data protection team be independent or can the responsibility be shared? So I think this is a great question. I just compare two things here. In GDPR, we couldn't do that, right? In GDPR, the data protection had to be independent, right? Same employee around, let's say a CISO becoming a DPO was a conflict of interest in GDPR, but not in UAE law, right? We don't have that conflict, right? Even if you look at an external DPO, it still will work out. Okay. So Has and Smriti, feel free to add on to this. I'm just going question by question.
Yeah, so just to add on to this, when it comes to UAE law, right, they're actually mandating that there has to be a role assigned for data protection officer, which we see that in other Middle East laws, right? Let's talk about Qatar personal data protection law. There, they don't have any such mandatory requirement where a DPO has to be appointed. Now, the reason why these laws have mandated and why they go for this kind of an approach is there should be no conflict of interest. Now, if I'm the CISO, I'm suggesting what are the security measures that should be implemented to mitigate a risk. I should not be the one who should be auditing it, right? Because the moment I audit it, there is a conflict of interest, and that separate role of DPO is coming into picture. And yes, this is something which has been, expected by the UAE data protection law. Akash.
So Suhas and Smriti, right? There is a lot of questions around data localization. So would you like to, kind of take up, how this law will affect the data localization requirements tomorrow, right? Whatever happens, right? If it's already active, but how is it going to affect, let's say 2 years down the line, right? Or let's say an organization which is around the globe, right? Working in UAE, how is data localization going to affect? Over to you.
So basically, data localization is not mandated in the law. What they say is, you can transfer the data outside UAE, provided you follow certain restrictions or constraints, like that is the whole point of bringing in the adequacy decision, right? The data office is going to determine which all countries are safe enough to transfer the data outside UAE. Whereas if you see some other regulation like the Saudi Arabia's PDPL or the Russia's data protection law, right? They explicitly state that the first copy of the data has to stay within the country, right? So UAE's law is not mandating something like that. The second point to consider here is the UAE's data protection law also allows the transfer of data outside UAE on the basis of consent. So for example, if a data subject actually provides his or her consent to transfer the data outside UAE, then that is well within the law. Or if it is bound by a contract, the data subject is bound by a contract with an organization. In that case, the data can be transferred outside UAE. So this is the whole point of having this adequacy decision and allowing countries to transfer the data outside UAE. So I just saw a question like which are the countries which are currently part of the adequacy decision. So I'd like to state that right now the decision is not yet out. So still the UAE data office has to be formed and they need to release the list of adequate countries.
Yeah, we are very good with session around questions, but since we are less on time, right, I would still like to talk about a few more things before we kind of go into our checklist, right? So see, again, as we promised, right? You have something to take out of the session, right? Not just knowledge, right? We will, by the way, we will provide these slides to you as well. You can download these slides. You'll get these slides. So compliance checklist, right? Now let's say what are these 5-10 things that I should do tomorrow, right? Suhas and Smriti. Let's say I'm today. I don't have anything with me, right? What are these 5-10 things that I can do tomorrow or today or this week or this month, which will get me very close to the compliance, right? So what are these things that you would kind of suggest today? Smriti and Suhas, yeah, you can take this up.
Right. So Akash, the first thing the organizations need to do when they are, going for a data privacy program is first they need to identify what are the personal information they are collecting within their organization, which basically calls for a personal data discovery exercise. So once they do it, they need to classify what would be treated as a personal data, what would be treated as a sensitive personal data, and they need to perform a data mapping exercise. Now, the other area, what the organizations need to do is they need to set up a notice and a policy claiming and talking about how and why their organization processes the personal information, and why do they process this. Basically, informing their customers in the way they manage their personal information, right? So that is also something which is expected out of the organization. The other area which the organizations should typically focus on, that once they have identified where the personal data is, it is time for them to gauge the privacy risk, and that is where they should go for something called as a data privacy impact assessment for the processes which are handling personal data within their environment. In addition to this, in terms of maintaining records of compliance and showing their compliance towards the regulatory authority and their requirements, they need to maintain something called as a record of processing activity as well. So these are some key things which the organization should look forward to as part of the law. And the best way to start this exercise is to identify where that personal information is lying, and how does that personal information basically link back to
Right,
the.
Smriti. So again, I think what we kind of have learned, right, over the period of time is, as Smriti has pointed out, is the first thing that comes to anyone's mind thinking about privacy is what data do I have, right? And that is something that we can only understand by doing a data mapping exercise, right? And some people are like, and some people who call me up as a, they're like, Akash, should I buy some tool which will do everything for me, right? My suggestion is do a ROPA first, right? See what you have, right? Then identify a tool which will help you if you need a tool. But my suggestion to everyone on this call is first thing that you should do after this, if you don't know about GDPR, if you've not done a ROPA before, a record of processing activity before, we have similar webinars around ROPA, and ROPA kind of runs around similarly around the globe. But still, I know the processings are different, things are different, right? Still, do it yourself, right? Look at a ROPA document, do that first thing. So you'll now understand what do you have. When you will know what you have, then you can think about a risk you have, right? And then you evaluate tomorrow, what do you need to do, right? So doing a ROPA is the best case scenario, right? As Smriti pointed out, as Suhas pointed out, data mapping is the key of anything that we do. And I think Smriti kind of pointed out a very important thing. I don't remember Smriti or Suhas who pointed this out. I think Suhas said that even as a processor, you have controller in complying to the law, right? So let's say tomorrow, let's take a scenario, right? The scenario is a customer tomorrow comes and says, hey, forget me, delete my data, right? Now you have a vendor who processes your customers' data as well. You can delete data from your environment, right? But how do you know that this customer's data is in your vendor's environment? And how do you take that guarantee that it has been deleted so that you can tomorrow tell your customer that, hey, we don't have your data, right? So I think these are all beautiful things kind of come out once we start running this compliance. But end of day, we start at ROPA, right? We start at a
Right.
data mapping exercise. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just kind of look at questions again.
Sure.
So guys, let's go back to Menti. Just this question is there. Is UAE's federal DPL inspired entirely from GDPR, or is it very different from GDPR, right? So yeah, over to you guys, and over to Suhas.
Yeah. So what I was trying to say is basically, you rightly said that ROPA is one of the starting points, right? So what we generally also recommend is doing a gap assessment against the regulatory requirement, right? So this gives this helps the organization to kind of scope out the processes which are in scope for the regulation, and also this also gives the kind of picture of which all processes we need to conduct a full-fledged PIA, or kind of integrate which all data stores to the privacy tool and all, right? So gap assessment as well, helps us to understand the overview of the organization in terms of personal data management.
Yep. So just for everyone else, what do you think? Is it inspired by GDPR, or do you think it's completely different? It's a new law. Please go ahead and do a vote, right? And I'm just waiting for all of you to kind of vote in and then go ahead. Okay, great question in this chat as well. So I'm just gonna point this question out as well. So Sajid has asked, how do you delete data from backups? Right. And I would love to love to participate in this answer, but yeah, Smriti was. How do you delete data from backups?
Sure. So basically what happens is whenever, we take a backup, and you have the legal, the reason you're taking a backup is because you have a legal standing for it, right? So of course if you can justify that, you'll not be able to delete that data when it comes to backups, or because of there is some retention measures in place. In that case, of course, you can deny that request. You don't have to erase that data completely. But of course, if you don't have any kind of legal backing or something, then the organizations have to figure out some mechanism in which they have to delete this data. And basically, when it specifically comes to the hard copy, that is where we actually see a kind of challenges in shredding the documents and deleting the data from the hard copy documents.
I think one of the things that kind of Suhas mentioned in the last, right, is the backup, the hard copy documents, right?
Yes.
And it's such a beautiful thing, right? And I have been around industry, right? And I don't know if there is an answer to that yet, because it becomes so difficult when you have these hard copies that are around. So I think digitalization may be the way, but backups in hard copies is still a lot of challenge, right? We can tomorrow come and say, hey, we will change the world around us. But I don't think it kind of works that straightforward, right? But for anything that is digital, we can talk about it. Backup, see, Suhas and Smriti rightly pointed out, how do you do a backup? You need to have, so basically, see, if you look at GDPR, we had legitimate backing up things, right? But now we don't have that. So first of things that we think about is, why are you doing it, right?
Yes.
Again, backups are also important. Let's say tomorrow there's a ransomware attack, right? I know a lot of CISOs are on this call, right? And they will all agree with me when I say the best way to safeguard against a ransomware is having a backup, right? And hope from God that that backups are not hit by ransomware, right? So we keep those keys separately, right? We keep everything separately, right? And we keep them safe. So backups are very important today for all business functions, right? To keep our businesses running, we need backups. So how do we kind of play around it, right? What is this law going to differentiate tomorrow in your backup? I think this is something that definitely we're going to come out with a exact answer. But yeah, I think this is something we still need to kind of, verify, because I have been working around GDPR, and I think Smriti and Suhas, they have been like, we have spent so many years around this, but still we use legitimate interest. Sometimes we use public interest, and sometimes we use legal obligation, right? Those are the ways, we kind of fill out and we keep the backups or archive the data today, right? That is how it goes around today. I think we kind of have to open this session for Q&A, but I just want Smriti to kind of, quickly help us around the difference between GDPR and UAE data protection law. So Smriti, would you like to kind of quickly wrap this up for us?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, UAE Federal Data Protection Law is highly inspired from GDPR, and this is the response which we got from most of the professionals here. Now, in terms of lawful basis of processing, where we see one of the major differences is legitimate interest is no more a part of UAE Data Protection Law, right? So any company or any organization today who is having a purpose of processing based on legitimate interest, they need to find an alternative route now, and that could be based on the other lawful basis of processing, which includes contracts, which includes on basis of legal obligation or consent. Now, coming to the next area, which is regarding data subject rights, almost all the rights have been provided under the UAE data protection law, and they have been highly inspired from the GDPR rights. But the additional right that has been provided is the right to complain, and that is to the data office of UAE, which will be set up and which will be governing the data privacy requirements for the organization. Finally, we have something else, the breach management requirement, and the requirement in terms of setting up the procedure and processes similar to GDPR, but it's just that the timeline now for the notification of the breaches, that has not been defined under the law, and that is where we require some sort of clarification from the executive regulations, which will be released shortly by the authority.
Okay, I think let's kind of open this up for Q&A. So guys, thank you for staying in the call. I know there were 200 people when we started this and we still have them, right? So I think this was session where we kind of kept discussing. Okay, yeah. So Suhas, this question is directly for you. So as you have mentioned that legitimate interest cannot be used as basis, right? What are the legal bases that are available now to be used?
So basically, when it comes from an organization standpoint, so either they can use consent as a legal basis, or they can use contractual or legal requirement, or probably if the organization is involved in actually the vital interest of the organization, or probably some kind of larger issues such as national security and all. In that case, the processing can happen. But yes, these are the basic legal bases which are allowed.
Okay, so Sneem has asked, right? I don't know if Shruti would you like to take this one. If our head office is based in UAE, right? And they want to, again, I think this question is kind of very straightforward because there is so much processing that happens in India, right? And for UAE, right? So how will that data transfer run out or run through, right? And I think this question is true for an Indian company who's providing a service in UAE and
Correct.
for a UAE company who's taking a service from India or I think around the country, right, around Asia, right, or anywhere in the world, right? If they are kind of taking a service from outside, right? So how does it work out, Smriti?
So yeah, so Akash, I think we have addressed this question. So because there will be, operations set out in other countries who would be processing the data of the UAE residents, and that is where any of the transfer mechanism has to come into picture, or any of the exceptions that have been provided. But yes, clarity regarding this has to be provided by the office, and that is where we are waiting more information on the data transfer requirements, right? Because in terms of adequacy, also currently India doesn't have a data privacy law. So how do we determine what would be treated as adequate, or because definitely India is not going to fall under the adequate countries, right? Because in terms of setting up a legislation, so there will be alternative ways of transferring the data. If not, then that kind of a clarification will come in the executive regulations. So that
Yep.
is something we're expecting.
So thank you everyone, right? First of all, thank you for staying back with us. Thank you for having this conversation. Thank you for letting us know your important questions. We hope we could have answered a few. We are towards the end of the session, and I think Smriti's and Suhas's profiles are also there in the chat, right? You can just reach out to them, reach out to me. Plus, a lot of people have asked, how do we download this webinar presentation? It's again in the link you will get here in the chat. Please download the webinar. Once the webinar is available on YouTube, we'll drop it in the chat box of this, LinkedIn events that we have. You can again have a look at it, right? Yeah, and I think that's kind of we're coming towards the end of the session. I know I have missed a few questions. First of all, I'm really sorry for that, right? If you have questions which I have or Smriti or Suhas has not answered, please reach out to us on LinkedIn. We will also respond very quickly. I will respond quickly. So I think that is something that we'll try our best to do. We hope we had a good session with you. Thanks a ton for joining this, right? So Smriti and Suhas, would you like to kind of give a thank you note to everyone?
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And we really hope the session was insightful for all of you. And our LinkedIn profiles are out there on the chat. So if you want to connect separately offline, then also we can support. And this is where I feel that this was a great platform to connect with all the privacy professionals and the security professionals from the region. And we really hope that we bring in more informative sessions in future.
Absolutely.
Sure.
As rightly said.
Yeah,
As
sure.
Smriti said, this
Yeah.
privacy is actually a small circle, right? So it's still evolving. It's not as mature as security. So thank you everyone for joining the session, and we are looking forward to meeting you all over LinkedIn or someplace, and then connecting with you to discuss how exactly more challenges can be tackled by all of us.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining.
And I think I just kind of wrap this up. I think we already have everybody dropping out. If you want, some information around, certifications, you have academy.tsaaro.com, right? I think we also provide privacy trainings around. So if you want to get those trainings up, right, just drop us a text, right, and we will try our best to kind of suffice that. So thank you everyone. Thank you for the session. Thank you Smriti. Thanks a ton Suhas, right? Great session. Thanks a ton for this. Have a nice day everyone, and we'll see you soon.